In a brand new interview, the head of the ECB, Christine Lagarde, just admitted that their central bank digital currency that's going to be launching in 70 days, that will be used by 745 million people, is going to actually be based on China's central bank digital currency that has an expiration date, meaning your savings expires if you don't use it.
A digital currency where it has been piloted, and there is only one which is clearly now launched in a very small country, but it is piloted on a fairly large scale in China, is of use and of service to all citizens. So it is not something that is good for the elite, or is good for the young, or is good for some versus others. If it is well done and if it is well implemented, it would be of service to all citizens.
Naturally, some of the Europeans are protesting this digital currency, especially considering they already get taxed somewhere between 40 and 50% of their wages. But Christine Lagarde, in a recent leaked interview, has something very interesting to say about these protests.
There are many protests in Europe against the electronic euro. Now, the problem is they don't want to be controlled. They don't want to...
Yeah, but you know what? Now we have in Europe this threshold. Above 1,000 euros, you cannot pay cash. If you do, you are on the grey market.
And that wasn't even the only very strange thing that Christine Lagarde just said about protests and savings in that interview. We're going to play the rest of that later on, but first we need to maybe entertain the idea of why Europe seems so hell-bent on rolling out these digital IDs.
European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, perhaps the most prominent advocate of that dreaded COVID passport, was out there advocating that we all have to have digital IDs because the future will be digital. You shouldn't have privacy, apparently. Yeah, that's what she believes. She claims that the IDs can be a real booster to emerging economies. The trick is to build public digital infrastructure, she said, that is interoperable, open to all, and trusted. Joining me now to explain just how dangerous this is, Nigel Farage, former Brexit Party leader. Nigel, this is about global government control and a way to, what, redistribute the wealth away from the so-called wealthy nations to everybody else?
So we're talking about Ursula von der Leyen, the SEC commissioner, who recently tweeted on her real, official, personal Twitter account, "We need to turn personal savings into EU investments." And this got so much attention that she's even been absolutely blasted in Parliament in Europe.
Frau von der Leyen braucht Geld, 800 Milliarden Euro für Aufrüstung. Darüber hinaus will sie, ich zitiere, private Ersparnisse in Investitionen umwandeln. Die Kommissionspräsidentin nennt das Spar- und Investitionsunion. Schon der Name ist ein Etikettenschwindel. Sparen will Frau von der Leyen natürlich nicht, im Gegenteil. Sie will mehr ausgeben, und zwar das Geld der Bürger.
These plans are clearly unpopular and they're getting so much attention, but why do our bureaucrats keep trying to push them forward? We did a video recently looking at the UK's plan to actively confiscate your savings in the bank. We did another video looking at the EU and why they're publishing papers talking about the urgent need to channel your savings into EU priorities. And we haven't even talked about why the Australian government right now is trying to tax people's superannuation or retirement accounts at 30% unrealized capital gains. That's right. That means even if you don't sell any assets in your retirement account, you're still going to be paying 30% taxes on it if it increases in value.
Without indexation, eventually every worker will be paying tax on unrealised gains, so they'll be paying tax on a profit that may never eventuate.
You put in a Trojan bill that basically is about taxes on superannuation unrealised gains, but it creates a framework, a legislative framework that with regulation perhaps down the track, they can change the asset class. So whilst it's on super now, they can move thresholds, potentially they could add in another asset class. Let's say they don't do changes to investment properties and negative gearing, but they might do a tax on the unrealised gains of your second, third or fourth investment property or your first investment property.
And now we have all of these new clips coming out of Europe that I want to play for you guys today in what I think will be a massive deep dive on this topic. I've seen so much confusion and even some conspiracy theories pop up in the 2 recent videos I've done for you guys. So I thought, hey, let's put all of this research together in one deep dive video and try to explain what is happening. Some people are looking at the World Economic Forum and them being centered out of Europe. Everybody's very familiar with their predictions for 2030, where they've said that you will own nothing and you will be happy. Is what we're seeing now coming out of the Eurozone and the UK kind of the first precursory steps on that road to 2030? I don't know, but I don't think so. I think it more has to do with a 4-letter word called debt. So debt is the first thing I want to look at today. We're going to be looking at 3 very important topics and subjects. We're going to try to wrap it all together at the end of today's video and try to make sense of why our governments are trying to attack our savings, which countries might be most at risk, and when will they try to really accelerate their plans to come after our savings. Let's get straight into it. The reason why I think all of this is happening is pure economics. So the first chart we're looking at here is looking at the countries around the world with the most amount of debt. Inner circles, this is showing us the countries with the most amount of debt. So we can see Sudan and Japan, they've both got more than 200% debt to GDP ratios, but have a look at those other countries in that next outer ring. Have a look at how many European countries. We've got France, we've got Ukraine, Belgium, the UK, Spain. All of these countries have more than 100% debt to GDP ratios. And again, another way to look at this is this chart I've got on screen right here. We can see, look at these countries with the most amount of debt in 2025. We've got France. There's a reason why I'm showing you this specific chart with France on it. But we also have other countries like Italy, Greece, and then Eritrea with the 3rd most amount of debt around the world. Now, what's most interesting about Eritrea and the United States on this list? Well, they are the only countries with citizenship-based taxation. So that means it doesn't matter where you live in the world or where you set up your business. If you have a citizenship, a passport from Eritrea or the United States, you will be taxed and you will have to pay tax to your home country even though you don't live there. Now, why am I so interested in citizenship-based taxation? Well, of course, that's because France just became the next G7 country to try to pass some legislation recently introducing citizenship-based taxation for their citizens. Now, again, why France? Well, it all goes back to debt. It goes back to the chart I just showed you a second ago. The reason why France is talking about this is because they simply have too much debt. This is why we're seeing these European countries talk about confiscating savings and capital controls and channeling retail savings into capital markets. That's fancy talk for steal your savings. So we've got France talking about introducing citizenship-based taxation. As we're going to see later on in the video, it's not just France. Canada in 2022 started talking about it. My home country, my ex-home country, Australia, started talking about this in 2023. And there were recent changes to the tax rules in Australia that just went into effect July 1st, 2025, that makes it more difficult for people like myself to live abroad and not pay taxes to my home country. So again, this is a global movement. Don't get confused. We're not just talking about Europeans and their savings in the bank being at risk, okay? This is why this chart here is so informative. It shows us the countries in the darker blue that already have citizenship-based taxation. But then have a look at those other countries. We've got Sweden, we've got the Netherlands, we've got Italy, and of course there's Spain, France, and Portugal. These are the countries who have begun to introduce some taxes on their citizens. Now, when did all of these new European countries start making these changes and start trying to tax their citizens as they tried to move away from their home country? Well, I consulted my good friend ChatGPT, and let's have a look at what they came up with. So it's really interesting is I was going back and forth with ChatGPT, and I was fascinated by the timeline of when these Western countries just passed or just introduced citizenship-based taxation. I simplified it with this tweet here. We can see Spain in 2014, Japan in 2015, Canada in 2017, Norway 2019, and then Finland in 2022. All of these Western countries started introducing exit taxes or more fancy ways to tax their citizens in the mid-2010s and early 2020s. As we're going to show throughout this video, this decade is kind of when everything changed. Now, why do I think everything changed in this decade of the 2010s? We'll have a look at where the debt load went for not only the US, but what we're looking at right now, AEs, advanced economies. This includes the advanced European Western economies. You can see they hit that 100% debt level in those early 2010 years. Now, what's so special about that 100% debt to GDP Rubicon? Well, we know when we run the numbers, once you reach that 100% debt to GDP ratio, it's nearly impossible to go back. There's this hedge fund called Hirschman Capital who wrote this 5 to 7 page report back in 2020 that literally studied the past 200 years of economic data. And they found, look, there's been 52 governments who have hit 130% debt to GDP ratios over the past 220 years. And historically, they've all defaulted within 15 years. So think about that for a moment. All of these Western economies, France, Portugal, Italy, Greece, America, Canada, Australia, we're all there. We all have unsustainable levels of debt, and we are in this 15-year defaulting process. And typically, this report showed us that governments, when they are defaulting on their debt, they're going to do lots of very interesting things. They're going to introduce capital controls. They're going to increase taxes. They're going to print more money. And this is the big way that governments get out of debt. They simply print a lot of money, devalue the money, and pay back the debt with the devalued dollars. So this is why I think predicting what's going to happen over the next 5 years has never been easier. I tried to sum it up in this tweet. I said we're going to see more conflict, we're going to see more debt, more taxes, more money printing, more capital controls, more loose border policy. I'll be careful with what I say here. And in the West, overall, we're going to simply see more tyranny and more authoritarianism. And this is simply because of debt. This is what happens throughout human history. This is not a conspiracy theory, although it is true that the World Economic Forum likes to make really strange predictions like this. Again, this video has nothing to do with conspiracy theories. I like to think it's just rooted in simple facts. It is economics. Western governments are going to be forced to introduce what China just did, which is introduce a form of digital money with an expiration date. That is what China's central bank digital currency does. And this is why it's so horrifying that Europe is praising China's CBDC. And the crazy thing is, the entire world, all of the Western governments are right now either exploring a CBDC, researching a CBDC, or they have an active pilot program that is right now being rolled out to its citizens. So again, the next 5 years, we're going to see a lot more CBDCs. We're going to see a lot more danger in the West, sadly. I hate to make that prediction, but again, if you have a debt problem, what is an easy way for a government to deal with that debt problem? Open up the borders and bring in more people to push onto the property Ponzi scheme. It's as simple as that. Again, I'm going to stay away from theories today. I want to focus on what this means for our money in the bank. So again, like we mentioned in the introduction, Ursula von der Leyen, the SEC commissioner, is openly saying, we will channel and turn private savings into much needed capital. This is her real Twitter account. When I saw this tweet, I didn't believe it. I literally had to click on the tweet and verify, oh wow, this is the real Ursula von der Leyen with 1.6 million followers saying the quiet parts out loud. So let's dig into what exactly this means. What does it mean to turn private capitals into investment? Well, when I was studying this article that the ECB published last week, I was sent down an interesting rabbit hole. Let's just say that. What I will say is I think it's insane that Europe is now coming after the 10 trillion euros left in people's bank accounts. So before I dive into what I found on the ECB website, let's just recognize and appreciate just how crazy it is for the European Central Bank to now come after the remaining 10 trillion euros worth of savings left in the country after they've already been very effectively stealing a lot of the Europeans' wealth for some time now. This here is a chart looking at the tax rates in Europe, and when I saw this chart, I was shocked. The dark blue and the purple colors on that chart is representing tax rates bigger than 50%. And when you start looking at some of the tax rates in these countries, I literally was mind boggled. We can see Denmark, they're paying 55.9% tax, France 55.4%, Austria 55%, Spain 54%, Belgium, you are paying 53% taxes to literally be surrounded by this. This is insane. Who's paying to live in a homeless shelter? That's literally what Belgium looks like right now. And you have to pay 53% of your money to live in this? That's the first real head scratcher, right? Wow, the ECB really has the audacity to come after the remaining 10 trillion euros worth of savings after they've already been pretty effectively plundering the civilization for some decades now with 50% tax rates. But this is what else got me really interested, and let's say fired up, when I jumped on over to the ECB website to investigate this channeling of retail savings. I found this. Look at this. Here at the ECB, we are working to keep prices stable. We do this so that you will be able to buy as much with your money tomorrow as you can today. Yes, this is the real European Central Bank website. I was absolutely shocked at what I read, considering the facts do not back up what the ECB is saying. We can see the euro's lost 40% of its value in the past 25 years. How is that stable? That's not stable. So again, why should we be trusting these guys? I don't think we should be trusting the ECB. And I found another reason not to trust the ECB from their very own website. They have this little section titled Our Values. And you can see they've got their values listed on the website. Independence, transparency, accountability, and ethics. Working with integrity. And you know what's really not integral? The fact that the head of the ECB today is literally a convicted criminal. I wish I was making it up, but it's true. The head of the ECB, Christine Lagarde, is a convicted criminal. It's not very ethically aligned, don't you think, Christine, or the ECB? Again, should we be trusting these guys with our money? They say that they're all for democracy and integrity, but let's have a look at what a former EU commissioner even admitted recently. He admitted that they cancelled elections in Romania. He said, we did it in Romania and we will do it in Germany if necessary. So of course, it's democracy if we win, but if we lose, we change the rules. This is why I always say democracy is an illusion if the government can control the money printer, because the left or the right, they're not working to protect your savings or stop printing money. They're all going to increase the debt, devalue the value of your savings, and steal your money. Speaking of stealing your money, let's dive into how Europe is going to channel retail savings into capital markets. I was really interested by this thing called the European Savings Union. You can see it pops up a couple of times, so I went to their very own website and look at what I read right here. This commission has adopted a new strategy to channel savings into productive investments. About 70% of household savings in the EU, worth 10 trillion euros, are held as bank deposits. That's interesting. They are safe and easy to access, but usually earn less money than investments in capital markets. The new strategy can support EU citizens in building their household wealth and saving for a better future. So again, I'm reading in between the lines a little bit here, but what I think is going to happen is a colossal rug pull. And what I think they're going to do to justify this is they're going to say, look, we'll give you a higher yield. Your bank used to pay you 1%. Interest rates have been historically low in the Eurozone for a long amount of time. So I think we're going to see a rug pull. Savings will be confiscated. They'll be converted to CBDC token, and a person will only be able to access the yield that is paid to them each month. And it will be sold as a good thing. Why do I think that? It's because they're openly saying it on their own website. They're saying channel savings into productive investments, and they're saying the problem with savings is that they earn lower yield. Literally everything I could find about this savings union online, every article, it mentioned the need to channel savings into productive investments. So let's read this here. The SIU aims to channel savings into productive investments, including those related to defense. The Rearm Europe plan, also known as Readiness 2030, I'm not making that up, this is not a conspiracy theory, this is on their website. This focuses on boosting EU defense spending and capabilities, leveraging the Savings Investment Union to mobilize private capital for defense investments. So they just said the quiet parts out loud. They said we're going to steal your savings and use it to fund war. That's literally what they're saying. We can also see that this is on their very own website, mobilizing private capital by accelerating the Savings and Investment Union. That is code name for stealing your money and funding war. We can see it here again. Rearm Europe Readiness 2030 plan. It says all the same thing, mobilizing capital. And this is again why I think it's very interesting to see the ECB come out and praise China's form of digital money. Okay, so I think it's hard to deny at this stage that they're coming for your money. And I don't think it's just going to be in Europe. I think it's going to be worldwide, and that's because of what I'm about to show you. But again, let's not forget, Lagarde has also said we need to adopt CBDCs so we don't lose control. Again, they're openly saying the quiet parts out loud. They're openly modeling their new CBDCs on China's. Again, Christine Lagarde was recently spotted in China recently where she gave this pretty cryptic message in a video. Again, I just want to stay on track and talk to the person who might still be thinking, but Luke, it can't possibly happen in Europe, right? We're this center of democracy. They surely can't seize my savings in the bank and one of the most capitalistic democratic places in the world, right? Well, it's already happened. Let's have a look here. So we can see that savings in the bank have already been confiscated in Cyprus in 2013. They got confiscated and frozen for 4 years in Greece in 2015. We saw Iceland faced with something similar in 2008. Then we saw Denmark hit with something similar in 2016. And then there was a new bail-in framework rolled out European-wide in 2016. This essentially allows the bank to steal your money when it goes bankrupt. So again, a bailout is when the government prints the money, devalues the people's money to bail out the bank and make it whole. A bail-in is far more explicit. That's where they just take the people's money and say, all right, the bank's insolvent, we're just going to steal the people's money. We're not even going to pretend to hide it by printing money and stealing the people's value through inflation. The bail-in is far more explicit. And again, they did that in Cyprus in 2013. There were haircuts given to all of the depositors. Same thing in Greece in 2015. Then the EU comes out in 2016 and then the EU comes out in 2016 and makes it policy across the entire continent. And let's not forget the same thing happened in Belgium in 2008 and 2009. So again, this has already happened. And the scary thing is they gave us warning just before the Cyprus bail-in of 2013. What do I mean? They gave us warning? Well, we can see here, the International Monetary Fund came out with this big 50+ page white paper in 2013 titled Taxing Times. And you can see what I've done here is, I'm not going to show you the whole thing, but if you scroll down, you can see the content section. On figure number 6, you can see a one-off capital levy. What is that? That's interestingly titled. What is a one-off capital levy? Well, I investigated and this is what I found. So you might be thinking, what is that, a capital levy? Well, I read the whole report and this is what it is. Let's read this little section from the IMF's very own paper in 2013. They said, the sharp deterioration of public finances, so this is government debt, in many countries has revived interest in a capital levy, a one-off tax on private wealth. This is an exceptional measure to restore debt sustainability. So again, I might be reading too much into this, but this happened in 2013, the same year that Cyprus got bailed out, and this happened, and this IMF report was published about a year before Greece saw its biggest bail-in and 4 years of capital controls in history. That's right, if you had money in the bank in Greece, you couldn't get more than 60 euros out per day. And look, as shocking as that report might sound, that 2013 IMF report titled Taxing Times, this isn't the first time, the biggest non-elected institutions in the world have talked about this economic situation and have talked about saving people's capital. Now look, I know how shocking that 2013 report from the IMF must have been, but it's not the first, okay? We have this other report written by the IMF in 2011. This is titled The Liquidation of Government Debt. The entire synopsis of this 50-page PDF was essentially, we need to print money, devalue the money, and pay back our huge debt in the devalued dollars and hope the people don't realize their money just got devalued, okay? 2011 playbook. Then in 2019, we've had this other playbook that was written by BlackRock. Again, this is the BlackRock homepage. This is called Dealing with the Next Downturn. Again, look at the date, August 15th, 2019. Look at the co-authors. Stanley Fischer. Stanley Fischer was the former governor of the central bank in Israel. Don't you think that's interesting? But all I will say is essentially this paper just said, look, in the next recession, we just need to print a ton of money and we need to give some scraps to the populace. We need to do some fiscal spending so that the populace doesn't get angry that we give all the money to the bankers. And again, what happened in 2020? Coincidentally, 5 months after this paper was written and published by BlackRock and a former governor of the Israel Central Bank, we saw the global lockdowns. Let's say that. We saw the global lockdowns and trillions were printed. And this is exactly what happened. Money was given to the populace, just a little sliver, and then a lot of the other money was given to BlackRock themselves. Again, let's not forget, BlackRock was the main receiver of this new capital from the Federal Reserve in America. So again, let's summarize all of this. I've thrown a lot of information at you today. What's actionable? How do we avoid all of these global governments around the world working to implement a CBDC? What happens if they want to confiscate our savings? We have a few options. Let's go through them, okay? We've got real estate. Some people want to put money in real estate. Some people want to put money in gold. Some people want to put money under their mattress. Some people even want to buy Bitcoin, okay? Bitcoin's interesting because here, Christine Lagarde, when asked about Bitcoin, made some really interesting comments. So Christine Lagarde essentially just called Bitcoin the escape valve, and she called for global cooperation to block the escape valves. Again, we're going to analyze all of these solutions in a moment, but let's start with Bitcoin, okay? So what's interesting is the European Central Bank wrote this article in November 2022 titled Bitcoin's Last Stand. We can see here the ECB wrote this massive paper on Bitcoin, And the summary here is pretty much this sentence right here. They make the claim that Bitcoin is on the road to irrelevance. This is pretty insane just for them to say that, but what's even more insane is when they said it. Let's pull up this chart here, because again, on the blue line, I've marked where the ECB wrote this paper, claiming that Bitcoin was on the road to irrelevance. Yes, it was true that at the time, Bitcoin was down by what, 75%. But like Bitcoin has done many times previously, look at what happened just after the ECB wrote that paper, after that blue line. Well, we've certainly recovered, and now once again, we are at all-time highs for Bitcoin. So again, I'd encourage the ECB to zoom out. They've been wrong on Bitcoin. Bitcoin is a solution for you to escape right now what I think is this global push to have your savings confiscated. Again, a lot of people, they get a little bit scared of Bitcoin. They say, right, Bitcoin's not as liquid as cash under my mattress. People understand that Bitcoin's limited and it can't be touched by the bankers. It can't be traced and it can't be taxed by the bankers if you do everything properly. But some people still get a little bit concerned saying, what if I want to borrow against my Bitcoin? What if I don't want to sell my Bitcoin, Luke, and I actually want to use it? Again, Bitcoin is more than savings technology. Savings should be used to actually spend from time to time. This is why I'm super excited to let you guys know about Firefish. These guys are a fully backed Bitcoin peer-to-peer lending platform that doesn't take custody of your Bitcoin, but they use these multi-signature vaults to lock up your Bitcoin in escrow and enable you to actually receive cash from your Bitcoin without you having to sell it. I think Firefish is really cool, and it helps us to kind of skirt around this global banking push that I think a lot of people are very cognizant of. Again, if you do want to check out Firefish, you guys can get 30% off your first transaction or your first loan with a promo code Luke. So again, I think Bitcoin, when used properly and when you're aware of the tools, it can be a great solution to get out of this Orwellian prison that is being constructed. Again, if you've got savings in the bank, they're coming for you. So I think having money in the bank, very poor option. Having savings even stored in a safe or under your mattress at home, it's an equally bad option. Okay, maybe it's not equally as bad, but the bureaucrats and the central bankers can still steal your money by simply printing more money. Because what they're going to do is they're going to devalue your savings under the mattress or in your safe at home, and they don't even have to come into your safe or underneath your bed to steal your value. They're just going to print the money. And that's what they're going to continue to do. That's what they've done for the past hundreds of years, and that's what they will continue to do. But what about real estate? A lot of people come to me and say, Luke, what about real estate? What concerns me most about real estate is this chart right here. Globally, taxes on real estate is increasing exponentially. I couldn't really believe the chart that I saw, so what I did was I pulled up ChatGPT and I asked it, okay, are property taxes increasing and what's happening around the world? Again, not just Europe, this is a global problem, this is a global push, and that's because governments from all around the world right now are racing to implement a CBDC. So this is a global solution. We need a global solution. We can see very clearly the UK's increased its property taxes from about 1% to now somewhere between 5 and 10%, which again is insane. Europe is doing the same things. The US's property taxes have actually remained somewhat flat, which surprised me, but the world is coming after property, and that is because it's stationary capital. ChatGPT even said this itself. Look at what it said here when I asked about the OECD and Europe. It said governments are relying more, bolded, on immovable property, real estate, to fund local budgets as it's considered harder to avoid or move. Again, I think real estate is not the place to store your capital if you're trying to hide it from people who are trying to confiscate your capital and openly say they want to channel private capital and private savings into their own priorities. So again, I don't think real estate makes it. Government bonds, clearly a terrible investment. Money in the safe or money under your mattress at home, terrible investment. Gold, probably the second best. I can't throw too much shade on gold. I think gold's a great option for those who don't want to be 100% all in Bitcoin, but I still think Bitcoin is simply the best option. Again, if you're looking for someone to buy your Bitcoin, I recommend you check out the Bitcoin Well. I really like the Bitcoin Well because they openly tell you, hey, we're not going to hold on to your Bitcoin. You need to custody that yourself, which is really cool. So again, go buy your Bitcoin from the Bitcoin Well, take self-custody of it, and then please do not make the biggest mistake that most people make. Write down your 12 or 24 words on titanium, not paper. That's why I really like Stampseed. They make these little titanium plates for your 12 or 24 words. And again, you guys can also get 15% off anything you want to buy from Stampseed with that promo code Luke15. So let's really talk about our options here. We've talked a lot about our problems, okay? Everybody can identify the problems around the world. But what are our solutions? So finding a solution in 2025, it could be a little bit difficult, especially with this digital prison that is kind of being constructed. For example, a lot of people say gold is a solution, a natural solution in a world where privacy is shrinking away from us. But let's not forget, it's nearly impossible to buy gold anonymously in a country like China. And again, let's not forget, if the government knows you own something, it will come after it. Let's not forget Executive Order 6102 way back in the 1930s when FDR in America made gold ownership illegal. And again, if they know you own something, that thing is not necessarily an escape from the system. This is also why I naturally don't think property should be thought of as an escape or as a solution to what very clearly looks like a global attempt to come after your savings and your money. Again, let's be very clear. Do not forget, in Australia recently, my government is trying to pass a law that would tax me 30% of my income on my retirement account. And this is an unrealized capital gains. Even if I don't sell anything or realize profits in my retirement account, the government is still going to come knocking and they're going to say, hey, look, Luke, I can see your retirement account went up in value last year. Give me 30% of it. So again, retirement accounts, gold, buying property, all of these things I don't consider solutions because the government knows I own it. This is naturally why I encourage people to not only buy Bitcoin, but hold the Bitcoin yourself, not on an exchange. Or don't buy a Bitcoin ETF. Don't buy a MicroStrategy stock. I always encourage you guys to buy Bitcoin and put it in your own self-custody. Now, I've literally used nearly every hardware wallet. I've used Cold Cards, I've used Ledgers, I've used Bitboxes. My personal favorites when it comes to Bitcoin self-custody right now is probably these little touchscreen hardware wallets you can get from Ledger. This is the Ledger Stacks. As you can see, it's a touchscreen one, and it's kind of similar to the Ledger Flex. Both of these are really cool options. As you can see, touchscreen. I'm doing this backwards, so forgive me if I'm not pressing the right buttons. But I do love the touchscreen options from Ledger. They're going to give you $10 of free Bitcoin if you buy any Ledger with the link down below in the description. So I think this is a great option that allows you to get around what our globalists are trying to do. Again, let's not forget, in Britain, beginning on January 1st, 2026, the UK is passing a brand new law that is coming after your Bitcoin. They want to know your identity. They don't want you to own your own Bitcoin and hold it in your own wallet. They're coming for your Bitcoin. They're going to try to tax it. And let's not forget what Christine Lagarde famously said when asked about Bitcoin in an interview.
It is a speculative. It's a speculative asset by any account. For those who had assumed that it might turn into a currency, terribly sorry, but this is an asset, and it's a highly speculative asset, which has conducted some funny business and some interesting and totally reprehensible money laundering activity. I think that there are criminal investigations that have taken place that I'm sure will continue to take place that demonstrate it. And there has to be regulations. It's a matter that needs to be agreed at a global level because, you know, if there is an escape, that escape will be used.
Bitcoin really is your only escape valve, and it can only be an escape valve if you hold your own keys. Again, what do we say in Bitcoin? Not your keys, not your cheese. If you want to be up to date on what else has been happening in the UK and Europe recently, I filmed 2 other deep dives on this topic. I'm going to put links to those videos somewhere around there. And with all that said, thank you so much to everyone who tuned in. I'll see you all in the next one.